Support for Starting Small comes from Human Scale, the leading designer and manufacturer of high-performance ergonomic products that help create a healthier work life. All of the products from chairs to standing desk and more are comfortable, easy to use, and sustainable, and great for either the office or the work-from-home environment. With an increase in shifting workplaces, comfort can be especially hard to find. As I run the podcast, I'm in front of my desk for hours a day, from scheduling, researching, interviewing, and more. Human Scale allows me to remain productive without the consequence of body stress to follow. Make sure to check out Human Scale at humanscale.com and use code StartingSmall at checkout to save 20% off your purchase. That's code StartingSmall at humanscale.com, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small, a podcast about brand development, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the modern world. In this episode, I'm joined by Jeremy Howlett, co-founder of Altra Running, one of the top manufacturers of road and trail running shoes. Jeremy's aunt and uncle owned a running shoe store. Jeremy's cousin began to alter running shoes in the back of the store, taking customers' existing running shoes and altering it to fit their stride. Realizing the demand for these shoes, they took the common modification of reducing the heel and created their own running shoe, which ultimately became Altra Running. Finding massive success and revenue growth with Altra Running, they eventually sold it to Icon Health and Fitness in 2011, and in 2018, the VF Corporation completed the acquisition of Altra. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Howlett of Altra Running. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you, Cameron.
Yeah, so I would like to start out with your upbringing. So where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in an average home in an average city in an average state. I grew up in Utah.
Okay.
Family of 7, so I've got 4 siblings. Both my parents were around. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad worked as a computer engineer, more on the electronics side of things than on like the programming stuff. But he taught me how to work with my hands and get things done. I built my first computer when I was 13, back in the days of Windows 3.1.
Okay.
So with it was a 386 Pentium chip. So that thing could fly.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I just grew up in that age of the early internet and just trying to figure things out and figure out how things work, and had parents that were around, taught me good principles, taught me how to work hard. I always had chores growing up. We had a garden, worked on cars with my dad. I remember replacing an old engine out of our minivan in our garage. He always had a workbench out there. I learned how to use a soldering iron at a very early age.
Wow. And
then, so I always thought I'd go into some type of engineering or something like that.
Yeah.
And so at the age of 19, I went and served a mission for my church, spent 2 years in St. Louis, Missouri, and came home and really didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do. I thought a lot about teaching. Mm-hmm. So I was going to pursue teaching, started pursuing a history degree. But at the time I got tied into financial advising.
Okay.
Mostly early on an MLM front.
Oh, wow.
Some multi-level financial advisor company. I don't recommend
totally
going that route at all. But somehow I got conned into it and suckered in. And so that got me into it. That got me into my tests. I took my Series 6 in 63. So I got licensed with that, and then wasn't sure that's really what I wanted to do, and started my family early. I got married when I was 21, had my first kid when I was 22, and had to figure out some way to provide. And so I kind of bounced around different degrees trying to figure out what I liked. Mm-hmm. And ultimately just settled on having an associate's degree and decided that college wasn't a good idea. So I dropped out of the rest of school and worked a couple of different odd jobs. I sold vacuum cleaners for a time. I sold copy machines.
Okay.
I think my favorite job was I worked customer service for the Utah State website. So I got to kind of see the inner workings of programming, and
Hmm.
that really interested me in web design, web development, computer programming, that type of stuff. And so I started to pursue that. And so I learned WordPress, taught myself how to do some basic CSS and HTML programming.
Hmm.
I've built several websites since then. I can certainly use any WYSIWYG editor as good as anybody. And then I can go in and play with some of the code when needed. And so that really interested me. So I pursued computer programming, but at the time, this was still early 2000s, right? Like,
Yeah,
there wasn't a lot of web development courses.
for
So
sure.
I was learning C# and C++, and I didn't want to be I didn't want to be a programmer per se, right? Like, I
Yeah.
didn't want to write computer programs. I wanted to be kind of a front-end developer. And so I dropped out of that and stopped pursuing that, and then stuck with the financial thing. So then I went and worked for Fidelity for a few years, got my Series 7 to be able to trade stocks and do some of that stuff. And then I got recruited away by a financial agency here in town. So I got my 65 and became a registered investment advisor, or I guess that would be my 66. I don't remember now. That was like 3 lifetimes ago. But,
Yeah.
So, which kind of sucks because I'm probably accountable for what I learned then, and I don't remember a lot of it. So
Yeah.
hopefully I don't break any laws and go Martha Stewart. So, but while I was at the firm, I really fell in love with marketing because I was marketing my own brand. I was marketing my own business, and I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this? And I was running into roadblocks constantly because of regulations. And so I couldn't create my own email campaigns because I needed every word that I said passed by compliance. I couldn't do much to our website. Our website was copy and paste basically from the parent company. And I was kind of the resident IT guy within our office. And so that all fell on me, and there wasn't a lot I could do. Like, my hands were really tied because of compliance and regulatory. And so but I had this desire to go into marketing and kind of pursue that. And so I actually started a marketing agency on the side, doing some social media marketing stuff. This was in the early days of Facebook.
Okay.
Back when, you're too young to know this, but some of the listeners might, especially if they were in marketing at the time, might remember FBMLA, which was the Facebook markup language.
Okay.
And so it was kind of Facebook's own twist on HTML, where you could go in and you could mark up and build your own custom landing pages on Facebook.
Interesting.
So you could build out So now you go and you get a page and it's really cookie cutter, right? Like, you got your header, your name, your click here, right? But you could build full on landing pages for your business page on Facebook. So that was, I don't think that's a thing anymore. I haven't played in that for.
Yeah. So is that where you stored your marketing agency's landing page? So was that like considered your website then at the time?
Well, so you'd still have your website, right? Like, I'm a huge advocate for your website as your hub, right? Like,
Yeah.
And Facebook, like I said, right? Like, Facebook's changed it. Facebook owns Facebook, right? So
Yeah.
you don't own that. You can at least own your website as much as the web is going to still be there, right?
For sure.
But you own it a lot more than you own anything on any of these other platforms. Whether if you build a LinkedIn company page or a personal page, if you build a Twitter following, an Instagram following, Facebook following, all of this stuff, right? Like these are great tools, but at the end of the day, if any of these businesses go, that whole audience goes crumbling down.
Yeah.
Like, if you're an Instagram influencer today, I hope that you're pretty well diversified. Yes, I don't foresee Instagram going anywhere, but they change their algorithm all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And so your audience activity is going to change all the time. And you don't own that. You don't control that. But if you keep a blog, you own that. You own that content. That's yours. That sits on a server that you pay for.
Exactly.
That you keep connection with, right? Your email database, you own that. And so we always preach, build your email audience, right? Like, build your website as your hub. And so, like, so as I'm building this, I partnered up with a guy that did some video stuff, and we were like, okay, we're going to build this little agency. And so I'm working as a financial advisor. I'm trying to build this agency at the time. And then July of 2009, everything changes. My whole world changes.
Oh man.
I was born in 1980. So in 2009, I was going to turn 29 in November.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling out of shape and overweight. And I was a runner back in high school. And my aunt and uncle own a running store here in Utah. They've owned it for probably 35 years.
Okay.
My cousin grew up working there. He started working in the store when he was 9.
Wow.
I think he got left alone for the first time when he was like 11. This little redheaded, scrawny runner kid managing this store by himself. Like, kind of picture that as an 11-year-old, right? Like,
yeah.
But he was a D2 All-American, and his little sister actually just placed top 7 at nationals.
Oh wow.
This last week in cross country.
Amazing.
So, yeah, so she's now an D1 All-American, runner for Weber State. But so this family's got a really strong pedigree. Dad won 1984 St. George Marathon. Like, so they know what they're doing, right? So I'm getting back into running, and I'm trying to run, and I keep having knee pain, and I'm running up against these hurdles, and it just isn't working for me. And even running trails and stuff, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I go to my cousin. I'm like, hey, dude, like, I need some new shoes. I need something. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, as a matter of fact, we've been cutting up these shoes, and we call them zeroed out, which ultimately we kind of coined the term zero drop from that. But what he was doing was he was hacking up running shoes where he would cut out the elevated heel. So it was the same height off the ground, heel to forefoot. Mm-hmm. And so he goes over the biomechanics and the reasoning for this, landing underneath a bent knee, like not heel striking, not hitting straight legged, and being able to run more efficiently. I said, that's kind of interesting. He's like, well, why don't you give it a try? I said, all right, I'll take a pair of shoes. He's like, no, let's go right now. It's like, okay, whatever. Let's go for a run.
Yeah.
I got nothing else to do. Let's go for a run. So I threw a pair on. He threw me some running clothes. We took off on the trail by his house, and it was a completely different experience for me running. It was smoother. I didn't have the knee pain. Like, obviously I was way out of shape still, but mm-hmm. but I didn't have the pains that I was experiencing before, and I felt different. And so we get halfway out on the run, and he's like, how does it feel? I was like, dude, that's awesome. He's like, yeah, you look pretty good. But now I want to compare and contrast. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, here, let's trade shoes. And he wore a traditional elevated heel shoe. And I was like, no way, dude, I'm not giving these up. And he's like, come on, let's just switch shoes. So we switch shoes, and then we run back. And I know it was completely noticeable difference.
Wow. And
like, knee pain was there, and he's watching me run. He's like, yeah, dude, you got terrible form. It's like, yeah, thanks, man, appreciate it. And so, like, so we get back to his house, and we talk about it and kind of dive in a little bit more. And I was like, well, what are you doing with it? And he's like, oh, people come in to the running store, they buy a pair of shoes, and then we just send them over to this cobbler, and he helps them get them zeroed out. I said, well, that's kind of cool. What's your long-term play? Well, let's just kind of do the same thing. We might keep like a size run of these modified shoes in the running store so that people can do it. Like, he was hacking up shoes from every other shoe company, right? Like,
yeah, that's what I was about to say. So he was taking existing models. Like, so if someone came in and they wanted a Nike shoe, just like remodified, that's what he would do?
Yeah, they didn't sell Nike for a lot of reasons, but that's all right.
Got it. Maybe like, yeah.
Asics, Saucony, Brooks, right?
Brooks,
like, you go down the list, right? Like any running shoe. I just have to throw that out there, right?
For sure. You know, I ran cross country and track back in the day. Yeah, I never wore a Nike shoe. Brooks. So,
but yeah, so they would just they'd take a shoe off the wall, the customer would fit it. Like, they wouldn't do any modifications in store, right? Like, they would say, hey, if you want to, right, like, you can buy this shoe, pay full price for it. And then we've got this shoe cobbler that we know down the street that knows how to do it. We've worked with them. You can go down and do it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, how many pairs of these have you done so far? He's like, I don't know, a few hundred. It's like, a few hundred? Oh yeah,
Wow.
like we've had people come and do it 2 or 3 times so far. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, so people are totally into it. Like they're spending $100 to $130 on a pair of shoes, and then they're going down and spending $20 to $40 to get them modified. Yeah, yeah.
Jeez.
Seriously. Well, are any of the shoe companies like not doing this type of thing? No, it's kind of against who they are. Like they've been doing the elevated heel cushioning story forever, and I don't think they'll ever change. We've talked to a couple of them, and they're just not interested in taking the concept and doing anything with it. So just seriously, well, let's start a shoe company. Then when he stopped laughing at me, I said, no, dude, I'm serious. Like, let's try this, right? Like, let's do it. Like, it sounds like there's at least a little bit of a market for it.
Yeah.
There's some interest. Like, biomechanically, it makes sense. So let's do it. And he says, whatever, Jeremy. We don't know how to we don't know the first thing about running a shoe company. I said, I don't care. We'll figure it out. And so my cousin Golden, he's like, he says, dude, whatever. Okay, you figure out how to at least get us to some manufacturing, and I'll come help you. I said, okay. So that's the last he thinks he's going to hear of it, right? Like, He's like, okay, I got this monkey off my back. Nothing's going to happen, right? Like, Jeremy's not going to figure this out. Like, no way. The shoe companies don't just pop up. They don't just start, right? Like,
yeah.
Like you look at the biggest running shoe brands out there. Like Nike's been around since the 60s. Brooks has been around for 100 years. Saucony about as long. Asics about as long, coming from Asia. Like these companies are tried and true, right? Like Audi Dassler was making shoes during World War II, right? Like before that.
Yeah.
And so that's where Puma and Adidas come from, right? So so these major shoe companies have long pedigrees, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, right, like this isn't going to happen. so this again, right? Like social media is a powerful tool, and I love it for the ability to connect, right? Like that's how we connected through LinkedIn. And so I jumped on a couple groups and I was like, hey, does anybody know anything about shoe manufacturing? I kind of have an idea I'm toying with. Can anybody point me in any direction? And I got a response. I was like, this guy from Portland, he's like, hey, as a matter of fact, like we help, like I work with this company that helps shoes concepts like come to reality. I'd love to hear what you're looking at. So we started a little communication back and forth, and then he was like, hey, I'm going to be out in Utah for Outdoor Retailer here in a month. Why don't we get together? So we show up in the lobby of the Marriott there across from the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City during Outdoor Retailer, and my cousin pulled out a backpack full of these hacked up shoes. And we tell him the whole story, and we kind of go through this and talk about the genesis of the idea and where it originates from. And he's like, wow, this is really interesting. Like I think you guys are onto something. He's like, let me talk to my team, see if there's some interest, and then maybe we can have you come present it. So a couple weeks go by, and then we finally hear back from him. He's like, hey, we'd love to take a look. Can you guys make it up here to Portland? So we jump in a car and we head up to Portland and take the road trip, and obviously hit all the cool stuff on the way. We go hike South Sister, and then we go through the gorge, and then we play at Cannon Beach, right? Like you got to do all the fun stuff when you're in your 20s and first real company road trip, right? For sure. So we get there and we start meeting with these guys, and we find out a lot more about who they are. And one of them is former head of Nike University, which is where they make all of their lasts and teach all of their last makers to make their shoes. The last is the form that the shoe's built around. One of them was a former VP at Adidas, actually lived in Germany, had experience with Timberland and some of these others. Another one was a CAD designer that had worked for Adidas and Timberland. So these guys really know what they're doing. Like
Yeah,
There
that's
was
huge.
probably 100 years of experience between the three primaries of this little company. And that's all they did was they had contracts with some of these big companies, but they were contracted to take a shoe concept, a shoe idea, and then bring it to a working prototype. And so we started working with these guys. It was my first time I ever saw a 3D printer, and they 3D printed our first last for us, and we kind of got to watch that be built, and that was really cool. And then the other guy, Vlad, had a whole shoe factory essentially in his garage. The guy had stitchers and form molds and everything. Like, he was like, "Oh yeah, I could make you a whole shoe here." And he's from Ukraine, and the guy was a genius.
Was this in Portland as well?
Yeah, this was all in like around Portland. So they all just kind of worked from home. It was three primaries in this company, and they'd work from their houses. The one would do the CAD design, one would do kind of the last building, and then Vlad would kind of do everything. He's a rapid prototyper and last builder and all of that stuff. But yeah, these guys were amazing though. And so we sat down in a little boardroom and talked it out, and they're like, "Yeah, we'd love to be involved. This excites us. We'd love to partner up with you guys and help you bring this to fruition, because we've wanted to do something similar to this forever."
Wow.
Vlad, who was at Nike, was like, "Yeah, we would try to push stuff like this, but then they'd push back and say we couldn't market it. It's not marketable. There's not air or cushion. Like, there's just not a marketable." And he's like, and then the biggest hurdle that we've run into, what they'd run into in wanting to do something like this, is we just don't have a marketing story, right? Like, we don't know how we would build a brand around it.
Yeah.
You guys bring the story. And that's what we brought to the table, was this. We brought the idea, the concept, but we also brought just the story of it, right? Like, 3 20-year-olds looking to start a brand, go up against the big beasts, one an All-American, one an ultra runner, and then me. But just with a desire to help people run better and improve their overall running. And so after that meeting, we were off to the races, and then it was about, okay, how do we get it financed? How do we get this thing built? How do we market it? What do we do? And how do we tell the story? And then now, 12 years later, here we are. Altra is a global brand.
Amazing.
That has done some amazing things, and we were the foundation of that and built that. And so Brian Beckstead was the other one involved. So it was myself, Brian Beckstead, and Golden Harper, and between the three, like, we had a ton of fun starting this company, and building it up from a little like the early concept. And this goes back to how Golden kind of came up with the idea. The early concept goes back to him wanting to try something a little bit different, and eventually threw a trail running shoe in his toaster oven that he had there to cook his Totino's pizzas. and just he heated it up. Like, this was kind of a common thing in his house, was to modify shoes. Like, his dad was always drilling holes in soles and trying to figure out better way to get traction on a trail shoe, or make a road shoe lighter and less impact, and all this stuff, right? So it's not like, to the world, it's like, why would you stick a shoe in a toaster oven? But to Golden, it was like, why not? So this was like everyday stuff. So threw it in there so that it would heat up the glues, right? So, and then he could peel off the outsole, and then he just kind of scraped off away at the midsole until the midsole was gone, and all he had left was rubber outsole and an upper. And then took some flat Spenco foam, which is like basically a really nice insole foam, double layered it, cut it to fit the outsole, and then glued it all together. And that was his very first prototype, essentially.
Wow.
And that's what he started with. And then it came to, well, this is a really cool idea, but is there another way to do it? And then they looked at the Saucony Jazz, which if you Google the Saucony Jazz, you should still be able to see it this way, but it's kind of got this two-tone, two-layer midsole, and you kind of look at it and you see, oh, I can see exactly where it kind of rises at the heel, and so why don't we just cut that little wedge out? And so with a bandsaw and a shoe cobbler, they worked to cut out that heel wedge, and then it was like, oh, well, we could do this with other shoes. And so it evolved from there, right? So
Yeah.
it was those two shoes were kind of the early stages of it. But then it evolved from there, and my very first pair of modified shoes were similar to what Golden had. It was two pieces of foam glued together with the upper and an outsole, and that's what set the stage for my experience with it. And then I think I had 3 or 4 other pair done after that, and until I finally got our first prototypes. But
Awesome. So I'm curious, how many models did you guys launch with from the start then?
so we launched with 1. So we launched, so this year is our 10-year anniversary. So actually 2 days from today, so today's March 26th, so on March 28th is when we received our first shoes into the warehouse.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah, so we're right at the 10-year mark right now. And so that, and we launched with one shoe, men and women. So we had the Instinct for the men and the Intuition for the women. Same as, well, not the same model, essentially, both a lightweight trainer. However, we did build them specifically for the male foot and specifically for the female foot. So we didn't just shrink it and pink it. We didn't use the same men's last and just shrink it down and call it a women's shoe.
Yeah.
Like we designed the women's shoe specifically for the woman's foot. Like we researched and studied the differences in the male and the female foot, and we built it specifically for that. So we launched with that one shoe in March of 2011. Okay. And we air freighted, or I think we fast boated our first shipment over. So we split the shipment in half, I think. So we brought half of it over fast boat and the other half slow boat from China. And the first shipment sold out in like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then our second shipment was probably another 3 weeks after that. And then we were without shoes for probably almost 2 months, I think, from the other time that our next order showed up.
Wow.
But our goal was to launch with 3 styles. We had three styles that we showed to all of our retailers prior to. So our flagship shoes were the Instinct Intuition for the road, and then we had the Lone Peak for the trail. The Lone Peak is now in its 10th iteration. It just came out with Lone Peak version 5. The reason that it's a version 5 is because we did things a little bit differently when we designed our shoes. Is we only updated the upper every year, and then the outsole tooling every other year. And so when we would update the upper, we would call it a 0.5 release. So we released the Lone Peak 1, and then we had the 1.5, and then we had the 2, and so forth. So we're on Lone Peak 5, but it's actually essentially the 10th rendition of the Lone Peak.
Got it.
But so the Lone Peak came out, I don't remember my dates right now, but kind of mid to late summer, I believe it was, of 2011. So we went quite a while with just one shoe. And while you're in the thick of it, it feels like forever.
Yeah, for sure.
And when we were without shoes, that felt like forever. And you really stress about that as a young company. It's like, we don't have the inventory, people want it. But also there's a really cool story to tell with that too, is that, hey, there's a lot of demand for this product.
Yeah. And
it's okay to be out of stock. But when you're in the thick of it, it's not okay. You're like, we're losing money. We're not selling shoes. Like, people are going to forget who we are. People are going to come in and copy us. And that was a huge concern, was people were going to copy us and squelch us out of the market, right? Like we're going up against these brands that are 100 years old, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to see this and say, oh, okay, there is a market for this. Okay, let's just go ahead and let's etch out a line and let's build it and let's just get rid of these guys. And so that was a legitimate fear of ours.
Yeah.
And well, we're now 10 years into this, and Altra continues to grow every single year. And ultimately, 2-3 years ago, was purchased by VF Corp, and is,
Wow.
the future is big, right? Like,
that's
the
awesome.
opportunity is big. The other kind of thing, the timing of it, I don't know. Like, I still look back at it and try to figure out, okay, what was it that made that time really unique? Because like 2008 to 2012 brought in 3 to 4 decent, that are now kind of decent players. 2 for sure, right? Like Altra and Hoka.
Yeah.
Are both really, really big players in the running shoe market right now. Topo has gotten a little bit of a foothold with Tony Post running that company. And then there's a couple more that we've kind of seen, but not big time, right? But it's kind of interesting. Like you look at Hoka and Altra, and then probably Topo as well, and they all seem to have some staying power. They're going to be around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas if you look back to the 30 years before that, like, we've probably seen Montrail as maybe the only one really that popped up and kind of stuck around for a while.
Yeah.
I guess Innovate a little bit, right? Like, it's really interesting to me to kind of look back at that time and see 2 big players come out of that period and be able to shake things up. And I think one of the things that we can attribute that to was the rise of ultra running.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's probably a big place where we could say, okay, this is why people are pushing themselves. They're doing different things. There's an interest in people going out and running 100 miles in one day and doing this multiple times a year, right? Like, and it has become interesting, and average people are going out and doing it, right? And so I think with that, it was, okay, if I'm going to rethink how far I'm pushing my body, then I'm also going to rethink what I'm putting on my feet.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just use what I run my half marathon in. I want something different.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So I think that's probably a big player in it, but there's got to be other things too. And I think social media has a big part to play in that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Conversation
what was your marketing like with such a high demand, like just right off the start, your first 2 weeks? What were you doing for marketing? Was it mainly social media?
No, well, so yeah, twofold.
Yeah.
Like, I think back to when we started, and I wonder if we could have done things a little more controlled and a little differently, and if we'd have been just strictly direct to consumer. But our play, Brian and Golden both grew up in retail. They both worked running store retail since the time, well, for Golden since he was 9, right? And for Brian since he was 15. And so they both understood that market really, really well. They understood what retailers wanted. They understood how to talk to retailers. They had been there themselves. They could relate really well. They weren't just some stiff executive trying to sell them a shoe brand, right? Like, they totally understood that market. They could talk to it. And that's the other thing too. Like, and I think that plays huge, right? Like, I was having a conversation with somebody on LinkedIn. We were talking about how important is the founder in a company today, right? And you look back and you think, well, maybe not. But how many of us know who founded IBM or Xerox? Or, like, if you really know your stuff, you probably know.
Yeah.
But if you go ask somebody on the street who founded Apple, you're probably going to get an answer that's accurate.
Yeah.
Who founded Amazon? You're most likely to get an accurate answer. Who founded Tesla, right? Like founders are becoming rock stars now, right?
Yeah.
And this is a lot to do with the age of social media, but I also think it has to do a lot with the story that associates that as well, right?
Completely agree.
The Steve Jobs story is super interesting to all of us, right? Like the Jeff Bezos story is interesting. The Mark Zuckerberg story is interesting. And that was one of the big things, is from early on, we wanted to tell our story. And there's value in understanding the Altra story. Still, the Altra loyalists hinge on that Altra story. The people that get it and understand that the real value in the brand is that it's not a stiff, tightened up executive run brand, right? Like it's runners that are passionate about building awesome product to help people run better. And that's the ethos and the genesis of Altra.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we started. And so whether people know our names or not, they oftentimes will know the story and they can associate with the story. And there's a lot of value in having that story. And it goes back to a lot what Simon Sinek talks about, right? Like it starts with why.
Yeah.
And we knew what our why was. And I hope that going forward, and I put out my plea, not being associated directly with the brand, but I put out my plea that Altra stays true to that story and doesn't lose it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to watch certain things go. Like the term zero drop is not being used by the brand anymore. And it's just like, why? That's part of the ethos. That's who the brand is. Like, don't try to turn the brand into another Brooks or Asics or whatever. Like, let Altra be Altra, because that's where the real value is in that story.
For sure.
So our marketing early on was just trying to get that story out. Like this was in the day when I could set up a Facebook page and I could acquire an audience and I could talk to that audience and I didn't have to put a lot of money behind it, right? Like I could do it organically. So the timing for that was really good. Also, there were a lot of running blogs at the time. And there was a lot of interest and this goes back to the timing, right? Like Christopher McDougall gets a lot of the credit, I think, for the early days, because he wrote Born to Run, and Born to Run was a bestseller, and it got people thinking like, okay, am I actually running right? Do I need to reconsider this? And people thinking about different footwear options and even testing with running in Vibram 5 fingers and some of those things, right? Like, so it was just kind of carrying that story. We worked with bloggers. These were the early days of YouTube, like trying to get some groundswell organically. Like we didn't have a big budget, right? Like we weren't out there spending money on AdWords and big print ads and all of this stuff, right? Like, so our early adoption was really tied to just this groundswell online. And races was a big part for us as well. We knew we got to get our name out there. Mm-hmm. So like we were at the Salt Lake City Marathon, pretty much any race that happened in our backyard, we made sure we were there. Yeah. And so like Utah certainly had a real good acquisition of customers here, but also Brian and I, we packed up his car, his Subaru. We loaded his top box with as many pairs of shoes as we could fit in there. And then we had shoes shipped to Boston, and we showed up at that Boston Marathon in 2011, and we were literally 2 weeks old as a company. Wow. 3 weeks old or whatever it was. So races was big for us. Like we didn't sell a lot of shoes at that first Boston Marathon, but I'll tell you, when we went back the second year, we saw a lot of people that were like, hey, I saw you guys here last year. Like, I've been interested in checking these out. And so just that repeated, like as people start to see a brand, right, the more and more. And as a D2C brand, it's easy to kind of get caught up in, oh, well, let's just focus on the ROAS and let's focus on driving business online and let's do this and that. But the more that you can get in front of the customer in a physical way, I think there's a lot of value to that, and figuring out how to do that.
Absolutely.
Has a big opportunity, right? Whether it's going the Johnny Cupcakes route and go turn a food truck into a t-shirt sales truck, right? Like, whatever it is, like figure out those guerrilla tactics that get you out and in front of the customer more than just trying to drive awareness through Facebook and Google AdWords and Instagram and those avenues, right? Like it's tempting to just stay that route or to go and be like, okay, well, we're just going to launch on Kickstarter and that's what we're going to do. But getting in front of people physically has a lot of value. And I get it. Like the last year, that's been really hard for a lot of brands
absolutely.
to be able to do, right?
For sure.
So, and it is hard too. Like that's a long-term play too as well, right? Because I know a lot of races like that first year at Boston, right? Like we came away from that saying, really, do we do this again? Because we did not make our money back. Mm-hmm. And so the ROI was not there. And so corporate partners were like, hey, what do you guys do? Like, is this working? But like, it's just that continual touch point, right? And over the long term, it pays out. But we've become so conditioned in today's market to think if I don't have an immediate attribution, if I don't have my 1 day or 7 day or 28-day window, right? Like if I don't see that dollar come back and if I can't track it, then it's not worth it.
Yeah.
But we lose out on so much opportunity because we don't look at the long play. We look at the short game, right? Again, going back to Simon Sinek, right? Like his recent book, The Infinite Game, kind of plays off of that a lot. That too much in business, we're too focused on these arbitrary dates of quarterly earnings, or to my point, that immediate return on investment, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you got to touch somebody at least 7 times in most cases to get them to purchase. Like they're going to have 7 touch points in most cases before they purchase your brand. And they can't all just be some image on Facebook. They have to be something different. So,
totally.
So we kind of understood that. So we were playing that world, and then the other side of it was the retail side. So there's 3 major retail events for running shoe companies. There's summer outdoor retailer, winter outdoor retailer, and then what's called the running event. And the running event is really, that's the big dog. Like that's where almost every run specialty store shows up to see what's new, what's coming, this is a great opportunity to connect with our reps, also get some education, etc. So 2010, we felt like we had to figure out how we could fund it to be there. So we made it happen. And one of the things that they allowed with us being there, or they gave us an option, was they have a shoe trial. I can't remember what they called it exactly, but basically we could bring a size run of sample shoes and put them in this room, and retailers could come and check them out and could take them for runs and stuff. So they had kind of this demo room. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, we're paying extra for that. Like we believe that if people put these on their feet, they're going to be sold.
Yeah.
So we paid for that, and that paid for itself easily because we were able to get the shoes on feet, and retailers felt it and experienced it.
That's amazing.
And so that was huge for us. And then we also had reached out to some key retailers from around the country early on to kind of get their feedback on our shoes. Kurt at Playmakers in Lansing, Michigan was one of those. And the guy was running around the trade show passing out our catalogs for us. Like, hey, you guys got, like he would go talk to all of his buddies and say, hey, you guys really got to go check out this Altra brand. Like they're brand new, but go check them out, go talk to them, go see what they're about. And so at that event, we closed a lot of retailers. Even if it was just, I'll bring in a size run and give it a try. Yeah. They were at least willing to give us a shot.
That's amazing.
So on the retail side, it was huge for us to go in, to get into retail, but also then to educate the retail staff. Mm-hmm. We were big on seeding shoes, getting shoes on feet of key retail staffers, helping them to tell our story, and telling them our story to get them bought in. And so that was our 2-pronged marketing approach. And we kind of mimicked that for years. We certainly expanded on the D2C consumer marketing side. we had an opportunity early on to get into Runner's World, and that was worth it. It was expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We put a full page ad in Runner's World, but that did two things for us. One, it got our shoes into their testers' hands. So even though we were late at the game, we were able to get shoes on feet of testers, and ultimately the Instinct won a Best Debut award because of that. I'm not saying that we won the Best Debut award because we ran the ad, but we got our shoes into testers' hands because we ran the ad, right? Like,
yeah.
It was like, oh, okay, this brand is serious, right? Yeah, let's make sure that we test their shoes, right? And then the other thing that did for us was that created an early relationship with Runner's World, and ultimately Altra became the title sponsor. They came to us early to become the title sponsor of their half marathon that they put on in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And so we were able to etch out that partnership early on, and that played really big for us. So we continued to drive that, and
amazing.
Ultimately grew a lot every year.
That's huge. So I like to conclude each episode with this. You've shared so many great pointers, so you've kind of answered this slightly, but if you could share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, what would that be? Maybe something you've learned or regret? Just anything. That's
a loaded question. How much longer do we have for this? Like an hour, 2 hours? Like, that's a loaded question. It is, right? Like, there's a lot. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, or you're just looking to build your own brand, or you're even just looking to make your mark in the company that you're at, or the company that you want to work for, right? Like my biggest advice is understand why you're doing it and make sure that everything aligns with that why.
Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate for what Simon Sinek talks about, right? Like, I've already quoted him a couple times here, because I think that his stuff is super valuable for doing what we do today. It's thinking beyond ourselves and what we can do for the greater whole. And as we focus on the greater whole, we're going to be a lot more successful, because people buy in to what they believe, and people believe in that which helps them and others. And I think that that's such a valuable thing, is understanding, like, you don't have to go work for a company like a Tom's that's going to buy one, give one, or you don't have to go work for a nonprofit necessarily, right? Like, those are all good things, and absolutely, if you feel inclined or impressed to go that direction, do it. But you can be a computer programmer working for Facebook and know why you're doing it and have a greater why, right? Like,
yeah.
And you just understand what your why is, and stick to it. And you're going to be happier. You're going to be more successful, and you'll be able to do some great things. So.
For sure. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Altra at altrarunning.com.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Cameron. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Starting Small. If you would, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow Starting Small Pod on social platforms to keep up to date on future guests.